said or you started, and all you were doing was replying to it. So I don't even go to those anymore. Satan Pit. I think Godlike Productions has to be the biggest Satan pit on the internet. But interesting. Interesting, because without your enemies, nobody would hear about you. So it serves its purpose. Had an interview Friday night with X-Zone, and what I thought was really funny about that was I knew from the intro he's either nervous because he's being really flippant and kind of obnoxious in this intro, or it's going to be one of those nights. And he welcomed me to the show, and I said thank you. And I really wasn't expecting anything at that point, but the Lord brought something to my mind just today. It was kind of funny, because normally when I do a radio interview, I say thank you, I'm so glad to be here, or thank you, glad to be here. And the Lord had held my tongue Friday night, because all I said was thank you. I didn't say I'm glad to be here. I didn't, it was so funny. I didn't even recognize that. Didn't notice it till he brought it to my mind earlier tonight. So I thought that was kind of funny. He knew what kind of interview it was going to be, and that's what kind of interview it was. And the Lord just holding my tongue. And I had to hold my tongue just to keep my patience, because it was just one of those things. Satan just wants to attack and discredit, and when that doesn't work, they'll just go to some kind of 2-year-old behavior, like cut you off the interview or whatever. But before the show, I had submitted 12 questions. He asked me to submit 12 questions that listeners might want to hear the answers to. And he never got past the first one. So tonight I thought I'd go through, because I thought these were really good questions that listeners would want to hear the answers to. And so I'm going to go through those tonight. I'm going to go through the questions that he should have asked me Friday night, and I should have answered, and we would have had an intelligent conversation. So I'll have that tonight, albeit if it's by myself, and about 50 of you that are listening or whatever. You look at these shows throughout the month, and it's completely amazing. Just thousands listening to the archives of these shows. The leading country behind the United States right now being China. And they never listen the night of the show. They'll catch it later. 12 hours from now, whenever they're on the other side of the world. And other than that, Australia and Canada. Those are the top 4 countries that listen to this show, out of over 150 that listen to it. And so it really gets out there. Just a message. I know my archives, you can go through and listen to them, and they're really not even time-sensitive, time-dated, because anything I said 3 years ago is just as relevant 3 years ago as what I'm saying today. And so I think that's why probably every one of my archives are so heavily listened to, and why I keep them up. Because people will go through and listen to every one of my shows for the past 3 years. I didn't have a radio show in 2005, spent a lot of time homeless that year, and so, it's always Satan's attacks. It's always one thing after the next. But I had a good time that year. The Lord was always with us, and we weren't needing for anything, just a house. So, anyway, one of the first questions I had listed to go through is, who and what are aliens? Aliens are fallen angels, folks. They're Satan. There was 2 different rebellions back in the early days. You had Satan's rebellion against the Lord, when he wanted to become like God and was kicked out of heaven. And then you have Enoch's rebellion, the Watcher's rebellion. And so 2 different rebellions, and that's why you have 2 different main variations of aliens, being, one, they're giants. One set of different factions of these aliens, fallen angels, are tall humanoid giants. We're talking 7, 8, 9, 10 foot tall. And then you have the other, like Satan and his group, that are lizards, greys, the reptilians, there's snakes, there's 200 different variations of these ugly type beings that we call aliens. And so that's the difference, because when Satan rebelled, part of his judgment, his whole judgment was not given to him at that time, because his whole judgment will come when he's chained and cast into the lake of fire after a 1,000-year reign. He still even gets after this time one more attempt to usurp the authority of God. But back then, part of his judgment, those that were with him, was to lose their angelic look. And so they lost their angelic looks. It was part of their immediate judgment. And even after having lost their angelic looks, Satan's, like I've said, his kingdom is very high-tech. And he has been able to create these clone races controlled by the hive mind capacity of chip implantation, like the Greys. The small Greys are all chip implanted and controlled. And there's other races like them that have been manipulated and created by Satan to use them as slaves to do their footwork. Where you got the giants, the Anunnaki, that are tall and humanoid and angelic look. And these are the children and the ancestors and on down the line of the Watchers that fell to come to Earth to procreate with human women. You read about that in Enoch. I believe they were standing on Mount Hermon, and there was 200 officers, and they had tens of thousands of angels underneath them. So it wasn't just a handful of Watchers that decided to leave heaven and come to Earth at that time. It was hundreds of thousands, and they came to Earth. They took what women they chose, which means they were abducting and raping them, impregnating them, and these women were giving birth to giants. And the giants, the women were giving birth to, Enoch talks about two brothers that were 30 furlongs tall, and so I'm imagining that's about 30 feet tall, just huge beings. And so, you know, in the time of Noah and earlier, you have just these huge giants on the earth. When you really sit back and try to look at you know, think about what was life like on earth really back then, it'll blow your mind, because the churches give you one impression, the History Channel will give you another impression, and then there's the truth. You know, according to Enoch, one of these brothers alone would eat 500 cattle a day. And when there was no animals, they would just start eating humans. And so this is what they were going through. And when the Lord wiped out the world with a flood, he destroyed the Nephilim at that time, the children, the hybrid children of these giants, between the unions between these women and angels. It wasn't women that had, you know, I heard Daniel Ott ask a guest this the other night on his show. He asked a guest about did human women procreate with these giants. It wasn't the giants they were procreating with. That was the result of their offspring, folks. That was the result of their offspring, was these huge giants. Now, angelic beings to begin with are going to be tall. They're going to be about 7, 8 foot, but that's not necessarily a huge giant like we'd think today, 10, 15, 20 feet tall. Now, remember, the giant that David took down was 9.5 feet tall. And David was only 5'4", and I can relate to David. He was smaller, 5'4", 5'6". And he had 3 stones. You know, he didn't just take down Goliath; he took down his brothers with him. You know, and so it just gives you a whole. That's why I liked that movie 300. I don't know if you saw it last summer. You get a good picture of Sparta going to war against the I don't know who they were fighting against, but they had the God King. And that was the whole thing I wanted to see, because these God Kings that ruled on the earth at that time, these satanic beings, that's how it was. That's how it was. These giants and these different types of animals on the earth at that time, and Satan always trying to create his own animals and his own humans. You know, I've talked about that before in my articles and my show. The missing link being between cavemen and humans was that Satan created the one and the Lord created the other. You'll never be able to connect those two. Because one was made by one creator and one the other. Satan's never been able to duplicate the Lord's perfect plan, his perfect body print, blueprint of a human. And that's because of the soul. Man became a living soul. The Lord breathed through the nostrils of Adam. He declared man was a living soul. Satan can't duplicate that. And so that's why you'll never find a link between all these cavemen and everything else Satan was experimenting with, trying to create a human, and the Lord's perfect creation. And so Satan's been furious since, and that's why he wants to destroy the Lord's creation, and we're seeing that today. He never stops trying to destroy